Hi there, Kate Bora and Fiona Pearman. And this week we're digging into a new conversation around what is very popular and talked about language, which is stop fixing women and fix the system. But there's some challenges with that. And what we've seen is that idea be popularized and on some level has been oversimplified because it sounds really progressive. But often the narrative and the actual practical application is quite incomplete and vague. We know systems are complex, they're slow to change. We're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by the system, which I think is super helpful to start with as well. And I think a really important concept, which is very much at the core of the work that we do, is that, systems are made up of humans and human behavior. And like many things in systems, they're complex, they're averse to change, and many people and also institutions benefit directly from the way that the current system operates. So when we talk about fix the system, let's talk about what we mean. It often defaults to a conversation around policies, processes, and structures. But I think it can be really helpful to talk about the different elements of the system.
Yeah, I think it's bigger than just policies and processes. We're talking about humans, we're talking about behaviors, beliefs, relationships, constraints. There's a whole lot that sits beneath it. And it starts really early. It starts with our early conditioning, with the way we think about boys and girls, and our education systems. There's a lot of socialization, there's influences, there's ideas of gender identity that are embedded in the way we think about raising boys and girls. Sometimes the subject choices that are encouraged can be different and can lead to different outcomes and career choices. And we've got single sex schooling dynamics, which we know leads to some challenges later on in the way people show up in systems in work, and the networks they rely on because of that. And we get a lot of messages about leadership, intelligence, capability. Children in schools are very influenced by who they see in charge. And while many of our teachers we know in our education system are women, a lot more percentage-wise of our principals are male. So what this says about who we think are leaders is really important. And when we layer this with our family system, which is a really important piece of understanding where we come from and how we see things, it's the original system we're part of. It determines a lot of our perceptions about people, relationships, interpersonal dynamics. We're going to be potentially biased towards the things that we grew up with and we thought were important. And that may be as simple as, whether our mums were caregivers or they were single parents or what they had to do in order to thrive and survive. And we take those messages on board, again, whether we're aware of it or not.
Yeah, so both complex, right? Even individually, our early conditioning, schooling has lots of layers to it. Put that next to our family systems, lots and lots of layers. And so these two elements of the system significantly impact how I, as an individual, show up and operate in the system that I'm part of. Next, we look at policy and institutional systems. These are some that we would be far more familiar with in terms of levers that we can pull. This is policies that governments can implement to influence gender equality. Here we're talking about parental leave design, availability of aged care, childcare, the cost, of course, our tax systems, and I think something really valuable and that's been an incredible lever that's been used and is really world leading here in Australia is the Workplace Gender Equality Agencies. So lots of opportunity to influence systems and typically probably where the default goes when we think about fixing the systems. We've also got our workplace system, and that structures, talent policies, procedures. We all know that humans don't like following policies or procedures. We like to get around those. But here, things like promotion and succession processes, salary review processes, informal sponsorship, and access to networks. All of these different aspects of the workplace system influence and impact outcomes for gender equality as well.
Yes, it starts to get complex, right? We're also going to acknowledge and flag that there are constraints and boundaries which are part of all systems. They're operating with certain constraints. Certain decisions that appear possible or acceptable are going to be driven by things that are potentially finite or are imposed, things like budgets, those regulatory frameworks, time pressures that we have, that access, the affordability of childcare, all of these constraints and barriers can significantly inform and influence the choices we make. And then when we layer in on top of that, long held social and cultural norms, expectations about how men and women should behave long before our careers begin, they influence things like our confidence, our willing to risk take, and our ability to self promote. And we talk often here, and you will have heard Kate and I talk a lot about girls being socialized to be more agreeable, to be more supportive, to be modest, to often be quiet rather than to speak up. And we do tend to have a cultural discomfort with women displaying authority and ambition. We often think we then swing the pendulum to, they're too loud, they're too this, they're too that. So these leadership stereotypes can really influence how we think about what's appropriate or not appropriate in positions. And we often default in our leadership ideas around masculine traits. I think there's a piece too about our expectations around caregiving generally and the way in which we allocate parental care. Australia in particular has the largest level of part-time workers or women taking time out to look after children. And that male breadwinner model really influences who gets the progression, who gets the opportunities, and who gets to those big leadership roles.
So six big, complex, layered elements of the system that we're seeking to fix. And when you put a human amongst all of those things, each of those elements in the system is going to drive different beliefs, assumptions, default behaviors that are going to influence the decisions I take, the actions I take, the messages that will inform whether I believe I'm ready to apply for a promotion or a progression opportunity, whether I have the capacity and the resources from a childcare perspective to be able to apply for that promotion, whether applying for that promotion is too risky and could compromise or risk my reputation and my psychological safety. All of these things, right, come together as a kaleidoscope in the conversation around gender equality. And so, whilst it's a very worthy focus, and we talk a lot about the importance of fixing the system, and in this morning's discussion, we've seen lots of different things that have been done. And I think Wajir is one of the best examples of what we can do to influence the system. And there is a lot going on here. There is a lot of complexity that means that this is not a simple concept.
Yes, I think as we unpack this and we think about the macro systems that we're all part of and it influence us, we also need to acknowledge that women in the current system are still showing up, expecting to be able to work, to lead, to do some caregiving, to be able to have choices. And in many cases, they're often absorbing invisible labour. And we're not even conscious that that's going on, either personally or maybe more broadly. So when we only focus on fixing the system, when we only think about that, there's almost a risk that we will leave the women operating in the system unsupported, that this system change is not neutral and waiting for it can entrench patterns and disadvantage. And because this is complex and our systems were developed by humans with best intentions and they evolved over centuries and they have a big hold on how we show up today, they reflect power imbalances that have been normalized over decades. And so, if we want to address this, if we want real change, and we want to think about these multiple elements, we need to be able to hold all of that and have a conversation that honors both the systems we're part of and what might need to change, but also how do we support and engage with the people, and particularly the women in those systems, so that we get the outcomes we say are so important.
We're going to leave the conversation there. If you've enjoyed today's confidence conversation and you know someone in your network who might benefit, we'd love for you, of course, to share it with them or tag them below. If you'd like to see more of these conversations, head over to our YouTube channel, hit subscribe while you're there. Over 400 videos, including videos from our clients who have been through the Acts of Confidence program and can really bring to life the impact of the work that they've done through our programs on what it's meant for them and how they've shown up in their system and different decisions and actions they've taken. And if and when you're ready to go deeper with your relationship with core confidence, visit our website, coreconfidence.com.au. Thanks for tuning in today. Don't forget to hit subscribe on your YouTube channel for more insights on confidence, leadership, and complex work environments. We drop new videos regularly and we'd love to share them with you.